I will talk about transit. What I'd like to do today is to take a little bit of time to talk about the plan, how the city arrived at the decision they did, and in order to do that also, I'd like to be able to share with you just some background on the system, how it operates, and some of the issues to help understand basically where I think where some of our issues are coming from. So the first question of why public transit, why should it be considered as a part of the initiative, and what are some of the issues? First of all, the current funding model that the city has to support transit is unsustainable. Understand the transit system has faced financial difficulties for a number of years now. When the economy went into recession in 2008, the city had to make decisions on what they were going to fund and how to fund priorities with challenges in the tax revenues. One of the things that happened was that the funding levels for transit were held at a constant level, and that started to begin the issues of financial problems for the transit system. But as you look at the budget moving forward, as we prepared information for the city related to the 2015 to 16 budget, we could balance the 2015 budget under the current funding scenario by spending all of our reserves, but in 2016 there needs to be additional funding provided in order to balance the budget. We provide about 2 million rides a year on Wichita Transit, which is really, really small compared to places like Tokyo and Dhaka. But understand the vast majority of the job trips that we're providing in the system are for persons that don't have the ability to drive. They're transit dependent. They either are poor and can't afford a car, or they're disabled and don't have the ability to drive. We have very few riders on the system that are simply choosing not to ride. So we know that the system is critical for many of the persons. The other thing that's interesting about our system, only about 40% of our trips are actually work trips. Many trips among our folks are medical trips, school, and trying to get along with everyday life. Again, as I pointed out, without funding, without an additional source of funding, we'll be looking at having to cut service in 2016. Let me talk a little bit about our budget and how the transit system is set up to give you a kind of a sense of our operation. First of all, the Wichita Transit is a relatively small system. We operate we have a fleet of about 49 buses, and we operate a peak hour requirement. All the buses on the street at one time, the largest number of buses that we have on the street at one time is 35 buses. We operate 16 routes. Most of our routes operate either a 30-minute rush hour and 60-minute off service level, off-peak service level, or 60-minute all-day service, which by most standards is about the worst service you can afford to operate. It gets much worse than that, then you really have some serious issues. We operate 15 vans. We have a fleet of about 21 vans and operate 15 vans providing paratransit service. So the fixed route system exists for people that have the ability to ride the system. Paratransit service operates for persons who, because of a physical disability, are unable to use the fixed route system. In addition to that, we contract with 5 private nonprofit transportation providers. Most of them are providing service to specific clients for various social services that they provide. But a significant part of our operation is supporting the operation of transportation services to these folks. We have about $20 million in rolling stock between our large buses and the paratransit vehicles. And we operate from about 6 o'clock in the morning until 7:30 in the evening. This is a summary of our operating expenses. The point here is that transit service is a highly labor-intensive service. Over 90% of the operating budget that Wichita Transit has is directly related to putting the bus on the street. I think about 65% of our expenses are wages and benefits. 14% are purchased ride services, that's the contracts that we have with the private nonprofit agencies to provide service for the disabled. 10% of our budget is related to maintenance of vehicles. 13% is purchasing diesel fuel and gas. The 5% of other includes things like charges from the city to provide HR services, finance services, IT services, as well as our insurance. As we've developed the budget projections for the city of Wichita, we have tried to illuminate some of the issues that we have with our financial challenges. And again, these issues are not something that happened overnight, but they've developed over a period of time. I think if you come back to Wendell's point, public transportation is a small part of what we're doing in terms of transportation in the community. And it's also a small part of all the work and services that the city needs to deliver. And so I think what we saw over a number of years with the transit system is that there were decisions that the city had to make about where to put their funding and how to balance their budgets. And some of the fallout in that was that the local funding for transit was held constant. If we look at our total operating costs in 2013, our 2013 budget was about $14 million. We project that the annual growth in the transit system averages somewhere between 4 to 5% per year. While it varies on what causes the increase, normally you can project on an average that that's about what your overall operating expense is going to increase at. Sometimes that's increases in labor costs through wage increases with labor unions, benefits costs, or volatile fuel prices. But overall, over a period of time, we pretty well see that's where our system grows. Transit is a public service. We don't cover all of our operating costs through fare box revenues, but instead, historically, transit systems rely on tax subsidies to provide our public service. And there's really a three-way partnership in providing that service. We have local funding, state funding, and then federal transit assistance. This is a summary of, in 2013, where our funding's coming from. We have about $5.5 million in local funds. $2 million of that are fare box revenues. Interesting to note that in 2011, when the city had financial problems, they raised the transit fares from $1.25 to $1.75 and cut service. They raised the fares in an attempt to generate additional revenue. They experienced an 8% revenue loss because of that strategy. But it's a pretty typical strategy that folks try to use to build out of a financial problem that isn't really successful. Sometimes it's successful in the short term, but really never in the long term. So, so the revenues, now the fare box revenues in the system have taken a decline and now leveled off about 7 or 8% lower than what they were in 2011. General fund, the city contributes $3.5 million a year out of its general fund to the transit operating budget, and that has been a constant number that's been held since about 2006 or 2007. There's been no increase. Although in the last 2 years, the city decided they would loan the transit system money because of the financial problems. It looked like the budget, we were going to go over budget, so they set aside $1 million to loan the system if we in fact needed more than the $3.5 million. And interesting, I'll get into in a minute, we actually, because of some things that we did to manage the system, haven't needed to tap that $1 million reserve that was set up for us. We get state assistance in the amount of $1.8 million a year out of the T-Works program. This funding had been relatively constant until last year, when T-Works had a pretty significant bump, and actually it was about a $600,000 bump in funding that T-Works had in 2013 that is actually what allowed us to balance the budget in 2013. Had it not been for that, there'd have been some financial problems. And we get about $5.4 million in federal money. The federal money that comes from the Federal Transit Administration is provided through a formula. And the formula is related to your system performance. So the more miles you operate in the way of service, and the more riders you carry, the more productive your system is, and the larger your piece of the federal pie is. At the same time, that $5.4 million can be used for two purposes. One, it can be used to support operations, and secondly, it can be used to support modernization or capital purchases like buses and things like that. In the last several years, because the local funding has been held constant and the transit operating costs have grown, what's happened is there's been a shift in reliance on the federal funds. In a normal transit operation, you might take, say, $3 million a year of that $5.4 million in federal money and use it to support operations. And then you take another portion of that to support capital, like fleet modernization. In the recent years, what's happened is that the city has had to rely on more and more federal money to support the operation because they didn't increase the local funding. And what happened is now they are now spending all of the federal apportionment to support operations. There is nothing available for capital. And the part of the discussion the city council had in this last budget was, if we're going to make this shift, we have to make a commitment to maintaining a modern fleet. If you don't maintain a modern fleet, what happens is your maintenance costs increase. And so the city determined that they have to make a shift in the way they're spending these federal dollars. And in order to do that, it creates about a $3 million annual shortfall if you don't rely on all the federal funding. The other thing that's interesting about the federal funding is that, remember, we had a fare increase and a service cut in 2011. The ripple then that happens because our productivity fell, we operated fewer miles, carried fewer people, we lost $400,000 in federal funding in 2015 and $75,000 of the state funding in 2015. So in an attempt to cut service and raise fares to solve our financial problem in the short term, we've created this challenge on the long term. So some of the consequences of the situation that we've been in, we've had to have service cuts and fare increases that have led to kind of a vicious cycle. And it also leads to providing inadequate service. This is when you start running buses only 1 hour, or you start eliminating routes and making it more difficult for people to operate. Or, as the city considered in 2011, you eliminate things like Saturday service. The other challenge that we've been facing is an aging fleet. Again, not making a regular investment in capital in fleet modernization has caused the costs to rise on the maintenance of the system, and it causes a decrease in your dependability. And as the system becomes more and more unreliable, then even people that can't afford to drive, start to look for other alternatives, which makes it really difficult. As a result, we've seen declining ridership and declining revenue in the system, and we're really failing to meet the basic needs of the people that actually need the service. When you talk to our riders, you find stories about people that could have gotten a second shift job and can't get there because they can get to work but they can't get home at 11 o'clock at night. Or somebody that works but the service doesn't because of the shifting pattern of jobs, we might not get within 3 or 4 miles of a new work site that's moved to the outer edge of the city, and now a person that's low income who lives more in the core rides to the end of the bus route and walks for an hour and a half to get to their job. So our first buses in the morning are really crowded with people who are trying to accomplish that. Or people that tell you it took them 3 hours to travel from one side of town to the other to conduct their business. So those are the kind of needs that we're not meeting. It's ironic that we're doing it in a city that's 93rd in terms of congestion. So you can drive anywhere in 20 minutes, but a bus ride takes 3 hours. So we're not about attracting choice riders. We're about getting people from one side of town to the other, or from one place, in order to just conduct their daily lives. So that's kind of the situation we're in. I've been here for a couple years, and we've been working on 2 things in order to try to shape the system. First, we've been trying to get a handle on doing what we do as cost effectively as possible. We're a labor-intensive organization that has very specific cost centers. And part of the nature of our business is providing mobility to people, access to jobs, medical treatment, or whatever they need, but doing it at the lowest possible cost. That includes a number of things. One of them is just making sure we're doing it right. And once we get a handle on that, making sure that the specific mode of delivery that we're picking is one that makes the most sense. But so we have, one of the things we started doing a couple years ago is doing detailed assessments of each one of our cost centers to see if what we're doing can be done better, more effectively. We did a maintenance assessment. We examined our entire maintenance operation and our ability to properly maintain vehicles, provide the rights, and provide the right backup. As a result of that, we ended up making some changes in the way we manage our process. We found that we were contracting work out and not training our employees better. So we began training our mechanics to do more work, and actually saved in a year almost $300,000 by doing work in-house ourselves with our own mechanics, rather than giving the work to outside vendors. We conducted a fleet analysis. We took a look at the entire fleet, its operating condition and its age, and developed a fleet modernization program that we're currently in the middle of. There are buses in the fleet. Your fleet needs to average about 6 years old. Once a bus hits 8 or 10, 12 years old, you start to see the maintenance cost per mile rise on those vehicles. We were paying $3 and $4 a mile to run some vehicles because of their age and their condition. We can buy new vehicles and they're operating at somewhere in $1.25 a mile range. So once you get your fleet and keep it modern, you can have a much better handle on your maintenance costs. We analyzed our staffing and made changes so that our operation was much more lean, that we had people doing the jobs they were supposed to be doing, and we had the right reporting responsibilities. We completely reviewed our paratransit operation. As Wendell said in the comment about the charity operations, we contracted with 6 agencies at the time, and we wanted to get a handle on the $1.7 million that we were paying in those contracts. And what we found was that we thought we weren't getting a deal. I mean, when we went into the study, I thought, okay, we're probably getting taken for a ride. It's an old transit term. Sorry. Sorry, I just couldn't resist. Turned out, in many cases with these agencies, we're getting a good deal. But we can get a better deal by coordinating what we're doing, by centralizing our scheduling and our dispatching. And so one of the things that came out of this review was the need to say to these agencies, I understand what you're doing on your own, but you need to do it together with us and collectively. So we're starting to move to where these services are getting coordinated. We're getting ready to do an analysis of our fare structure. Typically, well, in the old school, folks used to think you could raise prices to build yourself out of a budget issue, and that the only reason you look at fares is as a way to generate revenue. But fares is also a strategy that you can use to build ridership and to make the system more affordable to people. So we're going to do a complete study of our fare structure that's going to look at where are people kind of cheating the system and beating us out of a dollar here and there. How do we manage the system? But also at a bigger level, what policy strategies does the Transit Advisory Board and the City Council want to adopt? Do they want, and how do they use the fare structure as a way to generate revenue and generate ridership and create the kind of system that they want? The other thing that kind of builds off the fare structure is that the city needs to determine what the role of the transit system is in our community. Every community is different, and the demographics are different. And as Wendell said, there are cities that have these huge concentrated downtown areas, and a hub and spoke transit system really does a good job of carrying large portions of the population. There are other cities that are more dispersed, like Wichita, where things are more of a challenge. And so what we have to do is understand and try to have a community dialogue about what's the role of the transit system in the community, and how do we build a transit system to fit that. So over the last 2 years, the city has been engaged in a community discussion about what do we think the transit system ought to do, what should it be, what's important to the community, both in terms of the riders, economic development, serving the business community, and education. And so there have been a number of community engagement discussions that have happened and studies that have done. This is a list of 4 of them. The process began in mid-2010 when they started having financial problems with the system, and have continued through the ICT discussion of which transit was a part. So let me summarize what the council heard from that community discussion. First, it was agreed that, and a resounding word we heard from everybody was, the city needs a transit system. This community has to have a transit system. There are people that depend on it. So we can't imagine being without one. That was the first thing. Secondly, though, was the discussion about, we've got one, what does it need to look like and what does it need to do? Well, we heard from folks is that we need to expand our routes. The current system, as I think, again, Wendell hit a home run. If you live within a mile of downtown or 2 miles of downtown, you've got great transit service, because the transit system runs from downtown out 30 minutes, you turn around and you come back, and it hasn't changed in years and years. The city has changed, though. You look at housing, you look at shopping, places like New Market Square, you look at employment, it's located around the edge of the city. So one of the things we heard from people is you need to expand the system to connect where people live with where they need to go. You can't just run the buses and expect that they're going to fit the mold. And again, the hub and spoke system doesn't work in a system that's dispersed, but we actually have to implement grid system or crosstown routes that allow somebody to go from the southeast side of Wichita to the northeast side of Wichita without going downtown. That shortens the travel time, eliminates transfers. We also heard that we need to work with neighboring communities. In Wichita, the system has been operated within its city limits. Transportation issues do not know jurisdictional boundaries. A significant portion of the people that work in Wichita live outside of the city, actually might live outside of the county. There are people that live in Wichita that work outside the city, work outside the county, And somehow, the question was, there's a role for transit to play in establishing a relationship with the region because transportation issues are regional in nature. The people said we should run more frequent service. Again, we run kind of the bare necessity or bare minimum, and then we're on night service. One of the things we heard constantly was the need to get to second shift jobs, or I can take the bus system to get to work, but I get home at work and I want to go shopping, I want to do this, I want to do that. The buses aren't running. So the services are very limited, they need to be expended in nights. Based on that, we built a vision plan that was presented to the council in November of 13. And the vision plan laid out a system of improved services that talked about extending routes, adding more frequency, adding crosstown routes, and actually built a network for the city to take a look at and said, based on what we're hearing from the public, this is what the system ought to look like. It included the better service, and it included connections, talking about connections with the suburban communities. It also suggested that the transit system has kind of been operated in a vacuum, and it really needs to be operated and managed, built on partnerships. Partnerships with the community, agencies, the chamber, the business community, and education. That the transit system in the past had said, I'm running these big buses up and down the street, you need to change the way you move to use the transit system. And what we suggested was that the transit system needs to establish partnerships with the business community and say, what are the things that you need and how can we change our system and make our system adapt to some of your needs? And in doing that, we need to be willing to diversify our services. Transit isn't just about running big buses, it's about providing services that meet the needs of people and services that meet the needs of the community. So, example, we, on the west side of the city, we eliminated a route that went around a circle like this once an hour. Kind of went nowhere. And replaced it with two routes that were operating more on the main streets, and then we extended them to New Market Square. New Market Square is a major shopping area, and we didn't have bus service there because the bus didn't, that was more than 30 minutes from downtown. So we created two new routes. We went to New Market Square, and we truncated the routes, and we operated the service every 30 minutes instead of every 60 minutes. And we've seen ridership increases every month since we began those routes in April compared to the rest of the system that's been stagnant. The other thing that we did is when we truncated the routes, we pulled it out of some neighborhoods that were used to it. And we said, well, we don't need that big bus in that neighborhood. So we introduced neighborhood feeder services where we took vans and we coordinated the schedule of a paratransit operation and said, we'll pick people up in the neighborhood on a van and take them to the nearest bus route. And so we were able to still provide basic level of service to folks in these neighborhoods, but we got them to where the big bus is running in a more cost-effective manner. The other thing that we're looking at, just for your information right now, is van pools. We need to establish a regional connection. The original discussion in the plan was maybe we should run big buses, run expresses to Andover and Mays and places like that. Well, as we've taken a look at it, it appears that the concept of van pools might be something that works better than running the fixed route bus service. And so we're currently in the process of doing some work with some local employers to see if we can implement some pilot van pool programs. Van pools are interesting. You can establish a van pool fare structure in such a way that they pay for themselves and can help support the operation of the transit system. But what they do is they allow somebody who's employed in Wichita or lives in Wichita who maybe can get a mid-level job at Rubbermaid in Winfield but can't afford to make that 50-mile drive every day. Now the trip becomes more affordable. I don't have to run a bus, but these people now have an opportunity to improve their employment situation. So the plan, the council, in deliberating on the sales tax options, took a look at the transit vision plan and the financial situation that's facing the transit system, and took parts of the vision plan to be incorporated as part of the sales tax referendum. So under the city's plan, two things would happen. First, at the bottom here, additional funds from the sales tax revenues would be used to fill that hole that we're going to have in the budget, that $3 million hole that we're going to have in the budget. And so it stabilizes the service so that we don't have to start looking at service cuts. The second thing that would happen is that it would fund a portion of the service improvements that are laid out and identified in the vision plan. And that would allow us to start extending the service to get people where they need to go, implement some crosstown services, and add evening service to allow people to see second shift jobs. And the third thing is that we would continue to be able to have funding then by shifting federal funding over to modernize the fleet, make sure that we've got a good quality fleet and that we're holding down maintenance costs. The other thing that happens when you stabilize the system, this would allow us to show some improvements in service, stabilize the budget, and then understanding that rather than face a crisis decision in 2015 of what we do, when we get to 2019, we can have a discussion about what have we been able to accomplish through these partnerships? What have we been able to do as we look at becoming more cost effective? And now we can have a better, more thoughtful discussion about the role of the transit system in the community and how best to fund it moving forward and what kind of funding we do need after we've started to introduce some of these new types of service. This is a summary of the transit route improvements. I won't go through each of them in detail, but what the E17th extension is actually connecting the Wichita State area with Bradley Fair area. Hillside Crosstown route would provide a connection from the southeast side of Wichita straight north on Hillside and Wichita State to the northeast side. The Douglas Avenue route would operate service more in the core along Douglas Avenue, connecting College Hill and Delano area. East 21st Street route would actually operate from East 21st Street on the northeast side all the way west to New Market Square, which is a major shopping and employment area. We would improve two crosstown routes that existing right now. The Meridian and Rock Road services operate every 60 minutes. The service would improve every 30 minutes. We would actually start to couple routes. The other thing that is interesting in Wichita is that all the buses come downtown to a transit center, everybody gets off a bus, gets on another one, and they go again. What we're suggesting is that we ought to, what they call through route the systems. We take a route on the east side and connect it with a route on the west side. So if there are people that go through downtown, they don't have to transfer buses. And then eventually we'll de-emphasize the use of the transit center and the pulse system and transfers and actually through route buses so they come through downtown much more efficiently, trying to get people from one side of town to the other. And then finally, evening bus service is also on the list. Did I go the wrong way here? Oh, some of the outcomes we anticipate, we project that if we maintain the same, about the same passengers per hour in the system, we would increase our ridership by about 700,000 persons annually. Again, I think the ridership's important, but more importantly, talking about what we're providing in the way of access for whom and to where. We would have a much more modern fleet and better control of our maintenance costs. Obviously, the new buses have cleaner air, and the system would be financially stable. Again, the final slide I've got here just summarizes the way the $39.8 million would be allocated. Again, $2.9 million would be allocated toward repaying loans to the city and building reserves. We have no operating reserves, no tort reserves. The $16.7 million would fund that operating budget gap that exists today. $800,000 would be used to purchase capital other than buses. This would be paratransit vans and associated one-time capital like that. And then $19.4 million will be used to support the growth of services over the 5-year period. With that, I will, I think the plan was Al and I would do our thing and then answer questions at the end. Is that right?
Can we answer questions on this now, or since they're so different?
If you have a couple of specific questions, that's just fine, but we do want to try to move through pretty quickly here so that we can hear from Mr. King and then our final speaker as well.
You talked about the person per hour ridership. What is the current person per hour ridership figure?
We carry about 21 passengers per hour on the system right now.
Okay, why do they use such big buses that are always empty?
Well, that's a really good question. If you take a look at our system right now, on the base system, the trips aren't that empty. And again, if you take a look at the route, at the bus at the end of a route, you will see not very many people. By the time they get downtown, they're virtually full. Most of it's
because everybody has to go downtown.
And the fact that we're not running very good service. So we're running a fairly productive service for what we're doing. Now, there's a place for big buses, and there's a place that you don't need to use big buses. So what we've said is I get what you're saying. Our current route structure, most of the services are averaging well above what we need to justify or we feel have a big bus. And oftentimes if we were operating something like the body on chassis vehicles that hold 16, 17 passengers, we'd actually have to have 2 vehicles on the street, which is not cost effective. One of the things we do is run 35 buses during the rush hour, and then during the midday when there's less demand, we're only running about 17 buses. Now, there are areas where you don't need the big bus, like keep the big buses on the main streets, providing a truncated route, a high level of service. And then when you get into the suburban neighborhoods or less dense areas, run feeder services with smaller vehicles. So or run van pools. So the current route structure, much of it needs a big bus. But as you see us introduce new services, we would be introducing smaller vehicles.
My other question was, what was the effect of the free ridership days in the percentage of increase in ridership? And why isn't that an evidence that raising fares instead of reducing them would be a benefit to them?
Well, it was really interesting. We've done two free fare days. One was the day after Thanksgiving last year. And it was really, really successful. And then we did this a week in July. Our ridership doubled. It was really interesting that we really saw lots and lots of activity. And it was a combination. In some cases, there were people who were riding the system, that currently ride the system. But we also had a lot of new people try it, and then we got calls from people on, how do I use it? I'm giving it a try. It was evidence that, and this again comes back to the fare strategy, if you want to provide more service and generate more ridership, you might be able to modify your fare structure in such a way that you attract ridership and structure things in such a way that you're not losing revenue. The concept of deep discounting is one. I don't know if I answered your question.
It's my understanding that they used to have cross-route trip. I mean, when I was going to college, we had one running up and down Hillside.
Yep.
I don't know whose bright idea was to run everybody downtown unless it was the downtown boys who wanted everybody to go downtown. So, I mean, they're going back to another model. So,
Well, I'll tell you what traditionally happens, and again, I've only been here a couple of years, but I've been kicking around this business for over 40. Traditionally, services that head to downtown are more productive and carry more people than crosstown routes. So when you get into budget issues and you start saying, gosh, I need to eliminate service, those crosstown services are more expensive to operate because they're carrying fewer people. So those tend to be where the services are eliminated
well,
first.
my question, I guess, is how do you know where people want to go if the only choice is everybody goes downtown? I mean, you talked about New Market Square. What's the top 10 pickup places or destinations where people want to go?
Yeah, and that's what we try. Well, we try to match in our transit planning and our route planning. We try to take a look at the demographics, where people live, and then identify places that people are wanting to go. So you look at large employment centers, you look at large shopping centers, you look at medical facilities,
But
and
just
then you
because
start.
there's a big bunch of people out west doesn't mean they all want to ride the bus.
Right.
Who needs to ride the bus?
Right, right. And you match that up with the demographic. Yeah. Yes.
Curious, over the years, my husband and I working with the poor, talking about getting them to second shift jobs has always
Right.
been a big conversation. We've talked
Right.
about that before. But one of the first things they say is, after a few months, and some of those second shift jobs pay good, they're,
Mhm.
especially back when there was a lot of plant work. One of the first things they're gonna do after a couple months of being on that job is get a car. And so how does that play into the projections? I just can't
Well,
believe those people are gonna stay on
Yeah,
the bus.
but, well, yeah, you're exactly right. I mean, and
It's a
again,
bridge,
it comes
almost.
back to our role in the community, and transit's role in the community. Maybe it's okay that somebody who's working in McDonald's for $7 an hour got a job at Rubbermaid for $14 an hour, and we were able to transport them in a van pool. Or maybe it's okay they got a job at the hospital and could afford a car. We allowed somebody to become more productive in the community.
Yeah.
So it's just deciding as a community, what's the role of the transit system and what do we want it to do?
I agree.
Yeah.
I guess my question was more specifically, how does that play in then to you using that new rider as a yearly statistic in the numbers? When
Well-
likely they won't be a yearly statistic.
Well, but if we're doing our job right and we're building the system, a person today that gets a second shift job and buys a car and leaves, there's another person replacing them that's trying to become upwardly mobile or that moves into the community. So we have to be looking at the needs in the community and trying to provide and we have to be willing to change. I mean, part of the problem with traditional transit is they ran these routes and they don't change. They're not willing to look at it differently. So you gotta be willing to try to work.
Thank you.
One more, we'll go to Alan. Sir, in the back.
Steve, you said that you raised the rates from $1.25 to $1.75. What do you think riders think a ride is worth?
That's
So
a
the
re-
ridership went down, so
That's a-
obviously something went on in their mind.
Did we lower our rates?
Was it too much of an increase?
I'll tell you what, give me a couple months on this fare study and I'll have an answer for you. I don't know that I don't think they think it's worth $1.75 plus a quarter transfer. I don't know that I think, and I don't know that it's.
Comment was that we're gonna vote here in less than 2 weeks.
We
got a
can't
couple-
wait.
No,
2
I
months.
just
We
said-
can't wait 2 months for an answer for these, you know.
Yeah. I don't know. I think my belief is that there's a balance between a reasonable fare that attracts ridership and revenue. And what we have to do is find something that's going to
Well,
maximize
I
ridership.
guess the principle, it's a Sam Walton principle. You lower the cost, you increase your ridership, you're gonna get more federal money because you've got more people going and more
Right,
miles.
right.
It makes more sense to lower it to a point where you can make it efficient.
Yeah, yeah.
I mean, you're not basing it on
Right,
revenues from
right,
riders
right,
anyway.
Right. It depends on what you want to accomplish with your system. Chapel Hill, North Carolina, wanted to carry more people. That's all they cared about, so they went totally fare free. Ridership went from 2.5 million to 7 million a year. But there was an investment on the part, the cities, the university paid another $3 million a year to run the service. So
Because it was a
that's the,
benefit to them.
but there is a community discussion about what do we want to have. And so, what we need to have that community discussion long-term about